Welcome to our SPEED webinar around smart end-to-end air quality monitoring management for ports. I'm going to hand over first of all to Wouter, who's the project lead for the SPEED project, and invite him to tell us all about the project.
Thank you, Sharon. The SPEED project it's short for Smart Ports Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Development. And what we aim to do at the SPEED project is to connect the innovative people that we have on both sides of the smart ports market, so both on demand and the supply side. We know that there are innovative people on both ends, but they seem to have some troubles finding each other. And through webinars such as this one, we aim to facilitate both this connection as well as also building some awareness of what innovations there are, because we've also already done as part of the SPEED project several studies into what are the innovations out there in terms of smart ports, and we do find that there's quite a few of them, but many of them are not so well known. So with this webinar, specifically around the topic of air quality measurement and management, we aim to, we will provide you a menu of both two ports who will share their perspective and their struggles in measuring and managing air quality, as well as two technology providers who seem to have quite some interesting offering in this respect. Was that short enough, Sharon?
I think that's great. The most important thing is we'll pop in the chat how people can learn more about SPEED and get involved. So thank you, Uta. Air quality or air pollution is a significant point of interest for many organisations. European countries are always all working towards the UN sustainability goals. There's a desire to reduce emissions. We are aware that emissions from ports and maritime sources are arranging or causing deaths of about 4.2 million deaths a year caused by ambient air quality. So that's when we're outside. In the UK, that's resulting in up to 36,000 early deaths a year. So improving air quality is something that all of us are going to want to do. I'm delighted that we're going to start today with a port that has actually installed some air quality sensing and are moving from measuring their air quality to actually intervening with the vessels that come into the port and therefore managing what's happening. So I'm delighted to hand over to Jerry Clarke. Jerry is with Portsmouth Port, and I'm sure that he'll be able to tell you all about what they've been doing there. So if we could have Jerry's slides, thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Not my slide, but there we go. Excellent. Thank you. I've been working in Portsmouth since 1994, so I may actually have been working in Portsmouth for longer than some of you guys have been alive. Ports have changed over the years. 20 years ago, I had to stiff arm an air quality local environment officer out of the port. Now I'm measuring the air quality ourselves. Next slide, please. We have two targets for the port: a net carbon neutral by 2030 and, following the UK government, zero emission shipping by 2050. All of those watching, I imagine, know that the word net means we can't be carbon neutral. It means we're going to have to buy our way out of it with carbon credits. Next slide, please. Okay, you can't manage what you don't measure. So in 2018, 2019, we did 2 carbon audits to assemble a baseline. One of the advantages of being a pilot in the port is that when I climb up a ship's ladder and get on board, the captain usually rings end of passage. And at end of passage on a ship, they complete the consumption for the crossing of whatever ocean they've been across. For us, it's usually bananas from South America. So the chief engineer will be coming up with the consumption before we're even alongside. So I got a good idea of what the consumption is for every ship that comes into the port. Generally speaking, you're not off 48 tons a day at 18 knots. You can't generalize on everything, but that's for the size of ships we have, that's a good generalization. I didn't generalize for these carbon audits. In 2018, we produced 50,000 tons of carbon. In 2019, 60,000 tons of carbon. Now, the only reason those figures came out was because the UK government required us to produce a port air quality strategy, which we did. We handed it in 2020. Very shortly afterwards, they decided they weren't needed anymore, but it has given us a good baseline. What is interesting now is that the decarbonisation of the port, which is what brought this on, and the reduction of greenhouse gases has pretty much been overtaken by a desire to look at air quality. One of the things about Portsmouth that is rather peculiar is that it's owned by the City Council. It's one of the few municipal ports left in the UK, certainly one of the few successful ones left in the UK. So my stakeholders are actually the people of Portsmouth, and the board for the port are actually the councillors who are their political representatives, and they have come and said, what are you going to do about your emissions? So what started as decarbonisation has been overtaken by considerations of air quality. Now again, as a city council and as a local authority, we have to be very stringent when it comes to spending money. So anytime I want to put out a contract, I have to get 4 or 5 tenders. One of the things I wanted to look at with money that was kindly provided by the Port of Ostend and the Port Energy and Carbon Savings project that we were on, funded by Interreg, was for some air quality sensors around the port. If we had gone with the big suppliers, the guys who've really got in at the start of this, then my budget would have lasted about 2 years. What I was very fortunate to have is a chap who's talking to you later called Alex. He's a chartered engineer and a technocrat, I think is a good way of putting it. And what he came up with a system that'll give me 10 years instead of 2 years with the budget I've got. He's done that by not needing SIM cards. He's done it by using very small data packets being transmitted over low power wide area network that he already had in place for reading the automated water meters of the local water providers. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Wouter. All right, next slide. Well, it's not showing them. Oh, there we go. Hang on. Is that the next slide? Okay, that's good. That's
yeah, it already shifted 2 slides now, Jerry. So this is
okay, that's fine.
So there's a lag.
We go back to the chap fitting it. That'd be good. I think there's probably a bit of delay on me seeing it. Lovely, thank you. Right, these are the air quality monitors going in. They were created by Barter4Things, Alex and his team, from weatherproof boxes and off-the-shelf detectors. If I had gone for the DEFRA recommended detectors, which means that they're actually, what would you call it, tested to DEFRA standards, my budget wouldn't have got me a third of what I needed. What we've got is sensors that are 99.99% accurate as far as production is concerned. And they give me readings as one of the port managers to say, this is what we're producing on the port. Now, for some of you listening, it may be a surprise to know that ports haven't done this before. This is the first time we'll have done anything like it. Traditionally, and particularly in the United Kingdom, we've said, well, whatever we produce is necessary because 98% of trade comes by ship. So whatever we're producing, you're going to have to put up with it. That's no longer acceptable. It's no longer acceptable in many areas, but it hasn't changed the trade yet. It's going to change the trade very shortly. Thank you, Wouter. The next slide will be good. Okay, these are the positions where we put the 5 sensors. The sensors are picking up on nitrous oxide, nitrous dioxide, sulfur, but more particularly for me, particulate and fine particulate, 1 micron, 2.5 microns, and 10 microns across. Now, the reason that we're really picking up on that is because as a country, and as Sharon already mentioned, we're talking about 36,000 deaths a year that we believe can be put down to poor air quality, millions throughout the world. And one of the things that is becoming clear, yes, nitrous oxides are a problem, but particulates are an insidious problem because of their ability, particularly the very fine particles, get through the lungs and into the bloodstream. Okay, these are the readouts from the monitors that you're seeing here. This is a standard readout with all of them on it. What you can actually do through the magic of Alex's team is refine this. That's a week's worth going across with all the readings. If we go to the next slide, you see it's slightly refined. Okay, same one. We've scrubbed out the CO2, we've scrubbed out temperature. What you've got here now are your particulate readings for 10 and 2.5 over the period of just that week, the end of September, so only a week ago. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what I'm concerned about and what we should all be concerned about, which is particulates. And above that, you'll see what we're allowed in the UK from the Air Quality Standards 2010. Now, one thing we have to bear in mind, these are coming down. These are an annual average allowance of PM10s and 2.5s. I believe the WHO recommended levels for the 2.5s was 15. It's now come down to 5. So the UK is going to follow. I don't know when it'll follow, but our allowances for these exceedances are going to reduce. Now, what I can say is that I know we're below all the current levels for the UK, so my boss is very happy. I'm not sure what he'd have said if we'd gone above, but next slide, please. This is when we did go above, and this now is down to the 5th and 6th of September. The reason I picked these up is because they're at certain times of the day and I can identify those ships. Now, those peaks are interesting. They're above the levels we're allowed, and you're allowed 30 of those a year above that level. What is interesting for me, and this seminar is talking about the management of air quality, is that I know which ships those are. What's interesting in the first one is that it's one of a group of ships and the other group of ships in the same class are not emitting in that manner, so they have a problem. So we can phone up the owner and say, listen, that particular ship's got a problem either with exhaust valves or they've got shitty fuel or some problem that's actually can be identified. The one further across on the right is another emitter, a few peaks there. We know that why that was because it was me driving it, and you can even check when I came astern to put alongside on the berth. Now, what this is becoming is not just a measurement tool, but a management tool. As a pilot, I was walking to an aggregates boat on the berth. He was chucking out thick black smoke, and it was very strange because all that was on was the hotel load of just providing electricity for the crew and one small electric motor that was turning the travelator that was taking the aggregates onto the berth. When I got on board and asked the captain why he was chucking out such big black smoke, he said it's because they never switch the main engine off if they're in port for less than 8 hours. So these are old ways of doing things, and it's manageable. If we just take a step back and say, well, whatever's coming out is actually acceptable because we're feeding the country, then we're missing some very easy wins. An easy win that says, actually, you've got a problem with your fuel, captain, can you check particulates, or you need your exhaust valves changed, or captain, can you tell us why this is so poor in this area? Ultimately, if you don't get results from that, you talk to the chief exec who's going to say, actually, we love having your ships in, but those ships are coming up to be rechartered. Please recharter something else. We'll keep the trade, but get us some better ships. Next slide, please. Here's the reason why in the UK things are going to change. The lady here, or the young lady, Ella Kissy Deborah, died, unfortunately, and it was the first case in the UK where a coroner said that her death was attributable to poor air quality. So this is actually something that's going to change. It only happened in December last year, and it takes a while for these sort of things to work through the system. But if ever there was a reason for changing what we're chucking out, this one is it. For any lawyers amongst you, you'll be aware of what the law talks about bringing dangerous items onto your land and it leaking into other areas. That was a particularly Ryland versus Fletcher, I think it used to be called, and it was the case of a farmer who put some water onto his land in a great big lake, and the lake leaked and destroyed some property next to it. That became standard common law for the damage you do to other people. And it may be that air quality, and what happens is the new Rylands versus Fletcher. Next line, please. One of the reasons it's going to work in the port, I've never had a budget. I have only ever gone for grant and then been allowed to do what I'm doing. Thankfully, having met Wouter, I've been able to extend what we're doing with air quality and air measurement. But this is why there's going to be a budget, because we have said in Portsmouth we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. What I don't think the boss realized when he said that is that we're going to be net carbon neutral, which means the ships are still coming in and he's going to have to buy his way out. Now, in the UK, the carbon trading started this year. There were 6 million certificates up for auction. They were bought by 4 different companies, and the price was set at auction at £44 a tonne. Next slide, please. Okay, our emissions, if we those emissions I showed you at the start included the ship coming into the port for air quality purposes. That's correct. We need to measure all the air and the emissions that are coming out in the port. For purposes of carbon counting, we count the carbon alongside, because the ship itself reports its carbon and we don't want to do double counting. We can't have the port counting 10 miles of ship emissions when the ship's already reported them. For air quality emissions, it's important that we do count that, but for carbon it's not so important. So 26,000 tons, so the amount of emissions. It's very interesting. If you talk to a port about how long a ship is alongside, I can tell you there was a ship alongside for 18 months each year. That sounds odd. We got 7 berths, but the lay-by of ships was 18 months in total. All those days with those ships alongside, turning their generators and producing emissions, which is an interesting one. By the time we get to 2030, on a 10% increase, we're going to be up to 67,000 tons. Next slide, please. Carbon costs per tonne, it goes up 10. We're up to £114 a tonne. That's a very, very conservative estimate, because the whole idea with carbon trading is that they'll reduce the number of carbon certificates available, so that the price will just go up and up. I imagine it'll be 3 times that amount by 2030, but I had to show this to the boss and I didn't want him to have a heart attack. Next slide, please. So by 2030, that's how much it's going to cost them to be carbon neutral if they can't actually be carbon neutral. You're talking about £8 million a year to pay for the carbon we're producing. Because nothing at the moment that's happening is going to stop those ships coming in and producing that carbon, short of what I'm going to show you now. Next slide, please. Well, it would have been what I'm going to show you now if I got the slides right. But what we've got coming in next year are 2 LNG ferries that are going to produce a 10% carbon saving. And in 2024 and 2025, 2 hybrid large ro-ro vessels from Brittany Ferries that want to be plugged in with her alongside, far lower emissions. So we are moving. An interesting one on this one, we're going to talk about the measures we're taking at the port to reduce emissions. This is one of the major ones, believe it or not. And it's a filtering device that's reduced % of the particulates before it even gets burnt. The reason it's removing that is because it turns out the fuel that's delivered us is really, really crappy. It comes from the oil majors in perfect condition. It's taken up by suppliers and sub-suppliers, and by the time it gets to us, it's in a horrible condition. 67% of particulates removed just by using a kidney filtering system that's usually found in hospitals. This is done by a local company to us in Fareham, and he developed it himself. He sold his house to develop this system, and he's just now starting to sell it. And next slide, please, Wouter. So the biggest winners when it comes to energy saving for the port have always been LED lighting. We did that 10 years ago, 11 years ago now. There is nothing you can do to save energy that's better than LED lighting, 60% energy saving straight away. The only thing we can now do in a port that gives us that quantum of savings of energy is actually the provision of shore power. Next slide, please. So the measures we're taking, and I'm sorry, this might be going on a bit, we've got new LNG ferries in 2024 and 2025. We've got replaced all the lights around the port with LED. In the terminal itself, we've got a seawater heat transfer pump that uses the temperature difference between seawater and the air, multiplies it 14 times through a heat transfer system, and that heats the terminal in the winter and cools it in the summer. All the toilets in the terminal are seawater flushing. We put a road in, believe it or not, that saved tens of millions of miles by diverting traffic straight into the port that used to go into the city itself. We produced a cargo portal for drivers so they don't come into the port until they know their cargo's off the ship. What would happen before is they'd drive down and wait till the ship actually unloaded their cargo, which was a terrible waste. We're putting in 1.1 megawatts of solar array. We've got a dual chemistry battery that's going to supply and control that sustainable electricity as it goes around the port. And electric vehicles. All our port vehicles have been replaced by zero emission electric, and we put charging points in. Next slide, please. Now, the interesting thing for us is shore power. I've already said that we need to put it in to make the savings. Well, we can't, because the district network operator provides us with 2.15 megawatts. That's only just been upgraded. I need 30 megawatts by 2030 and actually need 20 megawatts by 2024. The berths we have there, berth 2, that's for the big cruise liners that come in. Berth 3, 5 megawatts each for the 2 hybrid vessels. Now, there's no way that our energy providers can provide that, but what we do have, the middle shot there is my dual chemistry battery. Now that has artificial intelligence and machine learning control on it that's going to control 1.1 megawatts of electricity that comes from our solar panels into storage batteries. The intention currently is that that will go to number 1 berth to power 2 cruise liners that currently draw 450 kilowatts an hour. The way to get things done seems to be collaboration. More and more now, the way to get source money and to get action is collaboration. So we have a letter from the managing director of Noble Caledonia that runs 2 very small ships. And he has said that at 450 kilowatts an hour, if we can supply the energy, he will retrofit the ability to take that energy on board the ship. And one thing I need to stress here is there is not one ship currently coming into Portsmouth that can take shore power. Next slide, please. Those are the solar arrays going up on the roofs all around the port to give us the 1.1 megawatts. Next slide, please. New ferry coming in, and this was the shot below is actually the new link span that was £9 million in cost, but the Interreg grant gave us £500,000 worth of sustainable items, which include soft start electric motors, biodegradable hydraulic oil, special paint, steel that lasts for a longer period of time, and LED lighting. Thank you. Next slide, please. The heat pump on the new terminal, I've already mentioned. The only thing I missed off there was the fact that we have southwesterly wind cowls on the roof. That means we don't have to use forced air ventilation. Next slide, please. Wind turbines. I've got 2 planning applications in on the port to get wind turbines up. In the UK, it's a bit of a problem putting up wind turbines. The one you can see there is the one I went to the opening of in Ostend Port when it went up with Wim Stoop. It was a brilliant bit of work by him, and we're trying to get him into Portsmouth, but politically it's a bit fraught. For the last 10 years or so, we've been allowed offshore, but not onshore wind turbines. Next slide, please. Yeah, green walls. Not particularly effective, but they look good. What we're looking at is actually putting in filters, industrial filters, and we can see if we can actually suck in the air more effectively than a bush. Next slide, please. This is interesting. The Ringelmann scale is a system that was developed many, many years ago. Some of you may know it. If someone's emitting black smoke, a member of the council will come along, stick his pencil through the middle. He'll put that up at arm's length, compare the colour of the smoke, look at how long it's out there for, and if it's emitting that colour smoke for more than a given period of time, you will get prosecuted. And that is something that will be really useful in ports. But what we have now, and this is an interesting one, we have microwave length and non-visible light wavelength cameras that can actually do the work of this on their own. You can actually track the smoke, you can track the particles, you can track the gases. And that, I believe, is the next step in the port for picking out what we're doing and where it's going. Next slide, please. So in short, carbon reduction and air quality improvements are what we're doing. I try and keep it simple, and that's what we are about. Next slide, please. Interesting here that we're a very effective port, very efficient, but the business model hasn't changed. There's more and more ships coming in. That's why our carbon production went up 10% between 2018 and 2019. So while he's got me doing all this lovely work where everyone says, aren't you doing well, he's bringing in more and more carbon. So the only way we can do this is go for intensity-based reductions that says we're getting better and better, and we're reducing our carbon production per 1,000 passengers or 1,000 lorries or 1,000 vehicles. That will not make happy those who want absolute carbon reductions, but short of shutting the port or just saying no more growth, and that might be what happens. We're not there yet, but it might be. That's what we can do. So we've got to be net carbon neutral by 2030, and we're moving towards zero emission shipping 2050. Thank you. Next slide. That might actually be it, Wouter. Hello, can anyone hear me?
We can, Jerry.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to say thank you very much. What an informative overview, not just of introducing air quality measurement, but the way that you've used the information that you've gained from that to plan forwards, adopting a number of different technologies. Really wonderful point there that ports need to stay operational, and ideally they're winning increasing business, and that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with reducing emissions that affect the air quality. So you have to look again at how you can manage things differently, or how you can look at things differently. And I'm delighted to have seen the picture of the Brittany Ferry, because I'd like you to all get on board with me and travel from Portsmouth across to Caen, which is the home of Sandie. And I'm going to introduce you to Thierry, who's going to take us through how consolidating all the measurements that you're taking into a visualization system can help us with managing air quality imports. So over to you, Thierry.
Thank you, Sharon. Do you hear me? Can you hear me correctly? Great. Okay, thank you. Now here, the ferry has arrived in Ouistreham, Normandy. So this is just nearby our offices. We are. So I'm Thierry Dusselier. I'm sales executive at Sandie. Thank you, by the way, Speed, for giving us the opportunity to introduce ourselves today. I'm very pleased to be here with you. So I'm part of Sandie. We are a French maritime tech company, actually. We are based, as I mentioned, in Normandy, and we provide business intelligence tools for the maritime industry, and especially for ports. So I have my presentation with me, so I'm going to share my screen. Sharon, if you could just confirm that it's running. Great. Okay, so Sandie is not a startup anymore. We've been founded in 2008, and so far we are experts in studying the ocean. Idea is to give as much information as we can to the maritime actors like ports, but also shipping lines, fishing companies, offshore wind farm construction, and so on. And we want to help them optimize their activities and especially improve the impact of their activity on the environment. So as we have been studying the sea for the past almost 15 years, we've managed to understand the challenges of our customers, and we realized that when it comes to the environment, the conclusions are clear, but Jerry just mentioned it. It's a no choice matter. I mean, you don't have any choice but to improve on these aspects. And it's very new because we've saw a shift in mentalities that like 5 years ago or even sooner, being sustainable was kind of a nice way to be, but now it's mandatory, and for the port it's becoming critical because it's a matter of sustainability and existence for the port. And this brings me to what I like to call the scary slide. But actually, this is something that comes from the different interview we have run with the ports in France and in Europe. So some figures have already been shared by Sharon and Reuters in introduction, but here is a list of some of the issue ports are facing today, and it's not even exhaustive. We could have added huge fine payments or bad image and so on. There are a lot of problem actually the ports are facing today, and it comes in the end to competitivity. Today, sustainability is not about how the planet is going to be in 5 years. I mean, it's not only about that, but it's about, is my company is going to be there in 5 years? I mean, is my port is going to be there? Will all my terminals be controlled by, I don't know, Chinese companies, because they do have the money to face the problem here, and I don't. So I'll be kind of kicked out my own port, but this is already happening in Europe. You can see the ports in Greece are now controlled by foreign company. So this is key in terms of sustainability, meaning existence of the ports themselves. But don't panic, hit the don't panic button because there are solutions. So as we saw in the Port of Portsmouth, a lot of actions are being taken to face these problems. And we at Cine also provide solutions. We like to say that we want to take this problem in an easy way. We know that there are a lot of solutions at the moment that are huge or very costly, that are necessary but very difficult to place. Jerry, you mentioned LNG fuel or hydrogen for the ships, electrifying the berth. So they are very complicated and big projects, but that have to start now. But we can also start in another way, just asking yourself, okay, I need to improve my impact on environment, but where do I start? It's like when you build a house, you don't start with the roof or the walls, you start with the foundation. And to do the foundation, what you have to do is you have to measure your land. And this is exactly the idea of our solution, is we are going to help you measure the impact you have on the environment. And I took the liberty to quote Jerry in my title and my slide title, saying, if you can't measure, you can't manage, because this is exactly what we want to offer, a way of measuring the impact of your activity on environment. So today I'm going to focus on air quality, but we offer a various set of applications that monitors basically every environmental parameter that you might need to monitor in the port. So it can come from air, but also for water pollution, noise quality, acoustic monitoring, underwater acoustic monitoring, and so on and so on. And what's interesting is that it's all in one place, because not only we want you to understand what's going on, but we want to give you an easy way of reading the information. So we are still going to provide you with graphs and very specific information. But as you will see in the quick demo I'm going to show you, the idea is for the stakeholder who is not an engineer, who is not a biologist, to say, okay, what's going on? What do I have to do? How do I anticipate to avoid the problem I've showed you before? So you measure, you get alerted, and you anticipate before it's too late. So I'm going to focus today on one of our modules, which is called the air module, simply at that. And what I could do, but I know the time is ticking, so I'm going to go fast. But again, the idea of this module is to be as easy as possible in terms of reading your information. So as long as you have sensors in your port, if you don't have them, we have an ecosystem of partners. And actually, typically the sensor that Barter4Things are providing could be clearly used on that. But when you have your sensor, all you have to do is add this layer of information on top to make it easy to understand and easy to read. So if I try and just do a quick demo for Portsmouth, so we link with Jerry's presentation, I just have to click on the area I want to monitor. So let's say the port. I'm going quick, but again, it's just to show you the idea. Then I'm going to place the different sensors I already have in place. So not on actually on the sea, but on the land is better. So this can be, let's say, Barter West. And let's put one in the east. This is not actually exactly relevant, but you get the idea. Then we are going to measure what you want to measure. So I'm going to use, Jerry, again, your figures when it comes to particles. So I believe you mentioned for PM 2.5 and PM 10, this is where you set the threshold where you want to be alerted, okay? So I understood that for 2.5, what you want to avoid is 25. But what we can do is set an intermediate alert before. So you know when it reaches 20, you have to take action. So you don't wait until it's too late. Okay, so let's put 1 and 20. And for PM10, I think you mentioned 50. So I'm going to set an alert at 30. Sorry if there are actual engineers in the room. I know it's not correct, but I want to go fast to have the result at the end. Okay, I have this, and that's it. Or I just configured one of the sensors, but you got the idea. But the project is done. And when you create it, it's going to appear if it goes well, hopefully. And of course, I have the demo effect that I love. But again, no panic button. I have a live project going on, so you can see. Sorry about that. Maybe I went too fast in the configuration of the sensors. But I have a live project ready here, and actually, it's an interesting project because it shows not only the air quality management, but also other environmental parameters. And this is the idea of the Cine Hub, is that you are going to be able to control everything you need in one single place. And as I mentioned before, idea is to make it easy to read. So when we go into the air quality module, you will have, of course, all the information, actually, as Jerry showed before, the graphs, the reports, and so on. But for the stakeholder, he needs actually one thing. Green is good, red is bad. Orange is, what do I have to do? I take action and I avoid any problem. In that case, the use case is a port expansion. And the idea is to being transparent with the region, so with the local authorities and with the constructor. So everyone has the same information, even the citizens. So the citizens know that the port is in control of its activity. And it's a smart monitoring, and I'm going to end with this because it's connected to the hub, so it's connected to other sources of information. And when it comes to air, it's connected to wind or to other oceanographic or meteorological parameters, which allow you to anticipate decision, to anticipate where the bad air is coming. If the air is going through the west, you know what, when the alert comes from one sensor, you can anticipate that it's going to go on the other one, and so on and so on. Okay, so it's an holistic approach, holistic view of everything that's going on in your port. I hope I wasn't too long, and sorry about my French accent. If it was not clear, I'd be happy to repeat during the Q&A. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Thierry. Please don't ever apologise for your accent. It's been really useful to be able to see how different sensors from different manufacturers and other information systems can be brought in together. So that's really helpful. We're getting back on board the Brittany ferry and travelling back across to the UK. I can see questions starting to come for you, Thierry, which is really, really helpful. So we'll come to those at the Q&A. Alex, I hope you're getting yourself ready. Jerry alluded to one of the reasons that what Alex is doing is a wonderful gift to ports who want to get ahead in learning about what's happening in their spaces. Because the technology that Barter4Things is doing is making use of sensor technology and low-powered wide area networks to maximize the amount of information that can be gathered at real low cost. So it's a delight to introduce Alex from Barter4Things. And Alex, I think you're going to bring your own presentation up.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. As is customary, 30 seconds before Thierry finished, I was just sort of going through, I'll just make sure that Keynote works, and Keynote wasn't working, so just kind of rebooted it. Anyway, just getting off the ferry at Portsmouth now. Get in the car and get down to Eastleigh, and here I am back in the office. Grant, so my name's Alex Barter. I work for B4T. So yeah, B4T is the name and data is the game. Now, I realise on this call, there's, everyone's tuned into air quality. Jerry, thank you so much. Thierry, thank you. It's all wonderful stuff. I know we're going to hear some good stuff, shortly from Sandie. So I thought, well, what better way to alienate the entire audience and to really sort of like, geek out on data. So at this point, you can all kind of zone out and say, okay, Christ, it's data. What is he on about? So if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to see if this. Oh, good Lord. There you go. So Keynote should be up. Sharon, is that okay? Can you see that okay?
We can, thank you.
Okay. Brilliant. So the Sharon introduced us as a data company who have focused on the low power wide area network method of transmitting data. And I'll come to the sort of like the specifics of that. But what I want to talk about is that the magic of 12 bytes. 12 bytes. That's not what it takes to scoff a McDonald's. This is the payload by which we transmit information. So this little picture here, I've actually got it framed in the office, and it's called My Most Important Piece of Data Ever. And if you look over to the left, there's a timestamp which has got 2017. It's the 3rd of November. That's the first bit of data that my business ever sent. So that was our first ever project. And would you believe it? It was in Hilsea, in Portsmouth, literally next door to Portsmouth International Port, but not the port itself. Anyway, I'm yabbering a bit here. So 12 bytes of data, where the arrow is, you can see this little bit of gobbledygook here. So it's a few numbers and a few letters. Well, so what? The secret of data is how much information we can send with so little gobbledygook. Now, in order for us to sort of get a sense of that, there are some there are some laws of physics by which we think about the transmission of data. It's the 3 Ps. So the data itself, the payload, this is the quantum, the amount of data, the power with which we need to send the data, and the propagation, which is how far we can move data. Now we're all aware, and we use of 4G or 5G. So if you reach in and pick out your phone from your pocket, you've got lots and lots of payload, so you can make a real-time call. You can make a call from sort of in your car, in your office, so some good propagation. But you're going to recharge that bad boy when you get in this evening. So power is challenging for mobile. We've got Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi is really good indoors. And you can do wonderful things like you can watch Netflix. You can swipe left and right. So data very, very good. Power not too bad, but with Wi-Fi, propagation is low. We don't get far transmitting through Wi-Fi. So there's there's a companion wireless transmission technique called IoT, or more specifically, low power wide area networks, LPWAN. And it's this method that we've chosen to deploy the air quality. Now, after all that, why don't we just use 4G, 5G? Or why don't we, why don't we use Wi-Fi? Why bother with IoT for air quality? So there are three compelling C's: context, cost, capability. So the first compelling reason for us was, how many different types of sensor can we fit with low power technology into a box? So something that was particularly fun for us to do was to not only pack in all of the air quality data sent every 10 minutes, but also to strip out and understand all of the shipping information using something called AIS, which is Automatic Identification System, and to compress, strip, process that, and fit it into that tiny 12-byte message. The second one, cost. Low power wide area networks, to connect the sensor is a tenner a year. And so if we pop all of our sensors into one box, it's still a tenner a year. Should we send them on a SIM, it's a £5 a month per sensor. So rationalizing the amount of data is our first step, where we can drive those cost benefits. And the third one is one of capability. This is the future. Now, I mean, I don't think Jerry will kick me virtually under the table, but there is I think it's out in the public domain now. There's a project on what I call hydrogen boats, and it's a project where we are putting low power wide area network sensors on everything and anything, whether it moves or it doesn't, in order to understand the benefits, the flight path, to mix my travel metaphors, and our general journey towards low carbon renewable fuels in maritime operations. So that's why we used low power wide area networks. I'm just going to cut this one sort of quite short, so I'm hoping for a few questions. So I think you might have already seen some of the screenshots from Jerry. So again, in just 12 bytes, and sort of driving this multicolored message home. But in just 12 bytes, this is the information that we're packing in. You can see carbon dioxide, temperature, humidity, 3 flavors of particulates, another temperature one, I still don't understand that one, nitric oxide, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and my favorite one, which is the ships. And this is something I'm particularly proud of. I didn't do it, Jamie did it, but we've taken all of this AIS information, real time, stripped it, filtered it, processed it, ordered it, and now we can see the changes in traffic, the synchronization of the particulate matter that follows, and also we can get the call sign out of the shipping information, and hence see if we can find any of the baddies out there. So that is where I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. I can just see in the chat that there's a question for you asking about talking about the level of the sensors. It's clear that cost advantage with LP1 is a real benefit. We've been asked to assume, or should we assume, that the cost advantage of simply setting up the cost of the transmission infrastructure would be larger? Or less so?
It's a good assumption, but it's a wrong one. So the LP WANs that we've used are actually publicly available in Portsmouth and have been since my favourite bit of data. So you see on that timestamp, my favourite bit of data was sent in whenever it was, November 2017.
Yeah, you say that, Alex, but in fact, when we looked at putting the tender out, there is yourself and 4 other major companies to provide it, and all the other major companies wanted the SIMs. You were the only ones who actually had the LP1, so the difference in cost there was immense.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay.
There's also a question there for you around how do you decide where to place sensors?
Okay. Hi, Victoria.
In order to maximise the information you're getting from them.
Sure. And Victoria, there's a number of assumptions that we take, but also some thought around the immediate environment to the port. So, you know, an immediate assumption we make is in and around prevailing wind conditions. So Portsmouth has a prevailing westerly for 11 out of 12 months of the year. The second assumption is that there is a height imperative. So we've put some sensors up as high as we physically can in the port. So we put monitoring boxes at the top of the lighting stacks, but also down at just above head level. So it's about 2.5 meters, which is you know, what we take to be people level. In and around the port, you know, it shouldn't be a massive surprise that ports are in populated areas. It's kind of how humans have evolved. So, you know, understanding the proximity of, you know, for us, a motorway in Portsmouth right next to the port, and can we pick, you know, is there anything that we should be picking up there? So there's just, I think, you know, part of it is instinctive, Victoria. I'm not sure if it's totally scientific. It's a case of understand the environment and look at the gaps, analyze what we're trying to do, and to measure those particular points.
Thank you, Alex. I suspect that we will come back round to some more questions around sensors and sensor technology as we come to our final Q&A. But the questions being asked there actually lead beautifully into what Sandie from Portland Port is going to talk to us about. Sandie's focusing on the decisions that Portland had to consider in commissioning and putting into place air quality monitoring system. So I'm delighted to introduce Sandie, Environment and Planning Manager at Portland Port, and allow her to explain those decisions and what influenced them.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you. Can you see my presentation there?
We can.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. So Sharon has introduced me as Sandie Wilson from Portland Port. And I'm pleased to be able to present today and sort of give our perspective on our experience with a commercial port perspective on, yes, air quality. We're a much smaller port than Jerry, so than Portsmouth. So I guess you could say ours is slightly different in that sense, and I'll give you that perspective as I go through. Let me just see if I can. Oh, I'm struggling to go to the next slide now. So hang on. Why is it? Here we go. Right. So yes, so the content of my presentation is it'll be a brief one, but a little bit about Portland Port. Why are we interested in air quality? Our plea for help, the dream, the challenge, the solution, the anticipation, and I'll take you through that. So just, yes, a bit about ourselves. We, for some of you, you may know, we're others perhaps not, but we're on the south coast, and we are very much on the English Channel, so close to the main shipping lane there. And we are a deep water port, so we can attract quite big ships, and the more ships, the better. In terms of size, I guess we're a smaller port, but although I'm not sure I should be saying that, you know, we're a big port. We like to punch above our weight, I guess. But we're a commercial business generating income from visiting ships, port services, and we're a landlord to multiple marine businesses. So we do operate a business park. And we're also a statutory harbour authority. So we're responsible for managing the harbour area and most of what happens within that. And just to give a different perspective on us, you can see on this slide, you can see our land ownership in our business park. That's a mix of commercial port land, but also green space as well. We've got an inner and outer harbour area, so we've got our breakwaters. Our jurisdiction is that red line there. So why air quality for us? Well, I think it was really a commercial interest relating to the growing cruise business. And what I would say is that I'd like to say it was my suggestion, but actually our commercial manager, who's very passionate about our cruise business, he came to me and said he felt that we needed to do something, which actually I quite like it when that happens, because you're off to a good starting point. And it's really very much about the risk associated with not being able to respond to matters relating to air quality. And it was seen as very much a potential threat to the business in the longer term. So we should start understanding the issue now. As you know, I think we all really know air quality is one of the top priorities for ports and has been the case for some time. And actually, you know, if you look at what's going on with Norway, they've got what's called the Environmental Port Index. The World Port Sustainability Programme is looking at a kind of a berth module specific linked to their Environmental Shipping Index for cruise. And then we've got, Jerry mentioned earlier, the air quality strategies for English ports that was introduced in 2019. And what I would say is, you know, I say we're a smaller port. You know, we're handling about 500,000 tons of cargo a year, and to be classified as a major port, you know, we've got to double that. Although we're trying hard, so might get there. But you know, coming back to the reason for looking at air quality, cruise calls, just from this table here, you can see that. In 2018, we had 32 cruise calls. These are day calls. Passengers come into the port, they head out to the local area, have a look around, and then they head home again, and the ship sails off. And we were looking at 40,000 passengers back in 2018. If you look at what's happened this year, we've doubled the number of ships, and we've had 100,000, you know, in excess of 100,000 passengers. And we're expecting similar numbers next year, possibly more. And actually, we are currently in the process of significantly upgrading one of our berths, because of the expectation, you know, that business is going to increase, whether it's cruise or, you know, cargo. We're struggling for space for the ships at the moment. So, you know, why air quality? We've talked about that quite a lot. This is a couple of examples from, you know, a local newspaper during the COVID period. We've had the ship layups out in the bay. You know, council deny campaigners' claims over Weymouth Bay cruise pollution. And you've also got, you know, shipping, which, you know, global shipping is a big emitter. The industry must commit to drastic action before it's too late. So what was our first step when we looked at this? And this is going back to probably, I think, 2019 now, when we really felt that we needed to do a death study. And we commissioned a local expert in air quality. And we asked her to look at, you know, what is all the current legislation and standards we should be looking at. Jerry mentioned some of those earlier. We wanted to get a better understanding what the local authority was doing and thinking. So we asked her to talk to them. Is there any data in the port already that we should be taking advantage of? I'm a big fan of using data that we've got. And really the focus of it was, you know, it was broad in scope. Although it started cruise, you know, we wanted to look in, you know, the whole port operation. So internal port operations, whether that's cruise, port vehicle fleet emissions, non-road equipment, also traffic. So traffic within the port and also traffic outside the port. And then tell us what we could be doing in terms of further work. So that brought that study to an end, and then we started on our journey of like what next, and collecting data was something that we were thinking about. So I mean, you can do different things, but dispersion modelling, you can have little tubes that you stick out in lots of different locations, which are, you know, very good. Quite, you know, for me, having to run around the port, having to change those all the time was going to be quite an effort. So I became increasingly a fan of the sort of real-time monitoring option, but obviously there's potentially a cost to that. And yes, we won't say any more. So anyway, the air quality dream. Is there such a thing? Well, this is where I think the Speed project came in, because actually in parallel to kind of all this air quality work, we were involved in the Speed project. I was becoming increasingly involved in the air quality side of things. And it enabled us to listen and learn from project partners, but it enabled us to evolve our thinking as well into what might be possible. And then, you know, now we're in this situation where others can learn from what we've done, and, you know, you've heard from others in this presentation. But we set our hearts, or I should say I set my heart on this kind of solution, hoping that we could find a cost-effective solution that would collect air quality data, bring other types of data in, because it's not just about air quality. You know, we've already talked about, so, you know, weather and, you know, that kind of thing. So bringing sort of different you know, AIS data, bringing that together, being able to view that in one place, being able to download it, and being able to look at this data all together and at one time. And that's really, you know, where we wanted to get to, but didn't really know it was possible. Before I get on to the possible, I need to talk about the challenge. Now, anyone would think air quality is the challenge, but I've very clearly highlighted our chief exec here. I did speak to him this morning and mentioned that he was a feature of my slide, and which he found highly amusing, and would openly admit to himself being the big challenge here. And I think, you know, Jerry has provided me with a shoulder to cry on, and so I'm grateful to Portsmouth for that as well. And yes, but we as Portland don't need to do anything at the moment. And, you know, we've had all this talk about you know, we should be doing something, but we don't need to do anything at the moment. And actually, you know, in trying to convince our chief exec to do something, I'm not going to produce something that he necessarily wants to hear. So, you know, how do you tackle that one? And then it's got to be affordable, because if I've got any chance of convincing him, then, you know, it's got to be an affordable solution. We're, like I said, we're only a small port, we're a private business. There's lots of things that we need to spend money on. But, you know, we got there. He committed, with help of the Speed project, to 2 real-time devices in a portal, and I'll work on him for the additional ones. And this is really what brings me to the solution. And I'm going to sort of thank Barter4Things for this, but also Portsmouth, because they've done a lot of the groundwork here, and we've really learned from what they've been doing. And the Speed project has been a great facilitator, and really certainly got us thinking about things. And I'll give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back for the tiny little bit we might have done to sort of move this forward. But yeah, where we're at today, Barter4Things have very much, you know, provided us with this ability to collect air quality data. And we're looking at similar things to what Jerry's talked about, so the PM 10 2.5 and 1, NOx and SO2, plus there are other things as well, like there was temperature mentioned. But shipping data is a really, you know, Alex has mentioned about that. This is really important, because if Alex hadn't done what he's done with the system, we'd have to go to it's accessible in other ways, but he's made it accessible to us in an affordable way. So that's brilliant. And then we've got our own weather stations on our breakwaters. We've got 2 receivers. They're collecting wind speed and direction. We're also capturing traffic movements in and out our main security gate. For vehicles on land, there's only one way in and one way out. And then, and you know, the logo's on the bottom here. You know, on the right-hand side, you've got weather file. Actually, Dorset Council, believe it or not, our local authority, manage the traffic data. But then there's a software provider, Drakewell, and there's another who provide the sensors for that. So actually, this is not a straightforward thing when you try and bring all this together into one place. And I think, you know, what Alex has done is brilliant. So, and just as my final slide, I called this the anticipation, because, you know, you're familiar with this. We've got the 2 devices, and there's the screenshot from the portal. We're collecting air quality data and the shipping data, but we are still due, you know, we're in the final stages of linking up with traffic and weather. So we're only in those very early stages of installation. And, you know, we're going to be moving forward to what do we learn from the data and where will it lead us? And that's very much the question. And that's where I will say thank you very much, and hand over to Sharon.
Thank you, Sandie. Really informative, very timely, as I could see that people were starting to ask about that decision-making process. And we all appreciate that one size doesn't fit all, but actually the collaboration, which Jerry brought as a highlight through his speech, is really important in sharing knowledge, and that's the reason we've organised the webinar today. Buta, can I just check, are there any questions there that are in the chat for us to cover now or to put to our panelists?
Well, yes, indeed, Sharon. There was one question by Michael Leggett, which has already been answered to some extent, at least from the Portsmouth perspective by Jerry. As saying that they've built a device measuring well nine different types of information. I'll go over the list now because actually the question afterwards is then are all of these equally necessary in the port? So it measures air temperature, relative humidity, barometric pressure, light intensity, rainfall through optical sensors. Pollution of the particulate matter at 2.5 microns and 10 microns, wind speed and wind direction. So and Jerry already responded from the Portsmouth perspective that due to the clean air zone policies that are being imposed, that it's mostly the nitrous oxide and nitrous NO2, which are quite important. But I don't know whether there's other perspectives or on that.
Yeah, there will be other perspectives, but in the UK, if your nitrous oxides are in exceedance, then you have an air quality management area slapped upon you. At one point, the city had 14 air quality management areas. We know these are from cars, but when it comes to consideration of health, it really, at the moment, you'd need to talk to an air quality expert, but really is the nitrous oxides and the particulates, and it's the particulates that really scare me.
I would concur with that, Jerry, that the science is showing that the particulates, and particularly the tiniest particulates, are causing the most damage to humans in terms of our breathing. For climate change, the nitrous oxides and the sulfur oxides are certainly things that need consideration, and actually legislation that's changing fuel usage. And certainly in the UK, there's a move towards electric propulsion and hydrogen propulsion, cleaner propulsions that are going to have that effect. But the sooner we can start to build the infrastructures to do that, the better. Are there any other questions there, Wouter?
Sorry. No. So no questions. It is a bit of a a couple of notes of appreciation for Sandie. I've also contributed one myself. So Sandie, indeed, a pat on the back is well deserved. So great job in convincing Bill, who is a self-confessed Luddite.
Thank you.
Definitely interesting. Are there any more questions from the audience? Because I see we still have quite some people in the call. So perhaps now we're at the end of the session, so you could unmute yourself and ask the question directly if you want.
Oh, there'll be one for me for Thierry, and actually for Alex. Do I take it that everything, Alex, that you put in is compatible with what Thierry's been talking about?
Yes, I think is the answer, Jerry. You know, all of these IoT type data streams, sort of the principle behind it is, you know, data should be available for everybody. My personal belief. I know Sharon is on board, and I know Sandie is. When we generate IoT data, the more it's available to other folk to use, to analyze, and to innovate with, it is only a positive thing in my mind.
Yes, and one of the things that I have to think about particularly is reports on a quarterly basis. I'm collaborating with the collaborating with Portsmouth University, as you know. And it is a case that data is data, but you need the chemists, I suppose, to actually talk about what the levels are. I'm not sure that, I mean, we've talked in the past about the sulfur detection getting confused by the nitrous oxide detection and sea air confusing the particulates detector. So it is a case that something like the stuff that Thierry is offering, particularly for my boss, might be something that if it pops up on his screen, he would actually like. But I have to say, it doesn't seem like that much of a step beyond what you've already got there. But what we all do have is a very, very limited number of people to do the work that's required.
Yeah, I totally concur, Jerry, and that's why, you know, with open data, you know, let folk do that innovating and, you know, do those investigations, you know, on your behalf, on my behalf, and on everybody else's behalf. We can all have opinions, but it's you know, information sharing and discussion, you know, is how we're how we make things better, not by holding it, I think sharing.
Well, the thing is, that's your point of view as a technologist. In order for Sandie to get Bill's backing, and in order for me to get my boss's backing, it actually is a case of getting the data out there only after we know it's not going to be compromising, and then you can do whatever you want with it. But what we're actually looking for is a little certificate that every quarter says you're below the UK levels that are there. But this is the start of it, and you've allowed it to happen. So thank you very much indeed.
You're still sharing it, Jerry. It's just the good stuff. It's okay.
Yeah, well, don't tell my boss I'm sharing it. He'll do a bill on me.
I think being aware that it's great to have had our audience stay with us. We have run slightly longer than we'd planned. I'll just summarise. I think a key message from everybody that's been involved with Speed is the value of listening to and learning from each other, and building that network of critical friends around who can help you to inform your decisions can be really helpful. Now, Speed is a wonderful Interreg funded project. The website and the innovation portal are open to anybody. We have popped links in the chat, but again, I will send those out to people afterwards as well. We learned from Sandie particularly, define what you need. And actually, our technology providers, I'm sure both Thierry and Alex would agree with this, they're there to provide this as service providers. So it's their role to provide the things that you need. So if you don't need absolutely everything, as Michael's very kindly offered in the chat there, talk about what you don't need, but also listen, because those geeks actually often know why they've included certain things in what they're doing. The word of warning, act early, but be prepared to discover things that you perhaps didn't want to hear, and have an idea of how you're going to respond to those things. And then last of all, even low cost solutions will have a monetary and human resource value. So my question to everybody here today is, what is there in your operation that you could either pause or stop or automate that would free up some sort of time, resource and human resource to innovate, and how can Speed help you to do that? At which point in time, I'm going to thank you all very much for joining us. Please do feel free to go out, and we have recorded today. I'm going to switch the recording off now, and we will make sure that that's made available to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.